us, and everybody's going to get an opportunity for 5 minutes or so to kind of tell a little bit about yourself, as well as 15 minutes to read from your passage, and then about 8 minutes questions and answers towards the end. So right now I'm going to introduce Mr. Eric Webb. He's here from Baltimore, Maryland. You have the floor, Eric.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing today? My name is Eric Christopher Webb, and I am the National Black Author Store Bestselling author of and an empowerment strategist. I've written 5 books. I'm the National Black Author Store Bestselling author of The Garvey Protocol and Love Letters, Death Threats, and Suicide Notes, New and Selected Poems and Essays, and I've also written 3 other books. And so today I'd like to share pieces from my 2013 novel, The Garvey Protocol, which was Phyllis Wheatley Book Award, First Fiction Finalist for Best First Fiction. And so I'd like to share the synopsis and then maybe 2 very short passages from dealing with the protagonist's upbringing, to give you a little background on what motivates the protagonist. But then also I'll take some questions and then maybe read a couple more passages if possible, but the passages are short. So I just like to start with the book. The book is The Garvey Protocol, inspired by true events. And the synopsis of the book is, the late hip-hop artist Tupac Shakur predicted it, America's final solution to its war on drugs. Black men are disappearing, being abducted, and no one is asking questions. Not the media, not the police, not the government. They're participating. Investigative reporter Cinque Solomon stumbles upon the key to the truth while covering what he believes to be another drug-related murder in Southeast DC neighborhood. Soon, Cinque becomes the target, and when professionals fail to kill him, he's framed for 3 murders, including those of 2 police officers. Now, everyone wants him dead. A shadow government agency, the police, and a brutal drug trafficker he helped imprison. He's running out of time, and to save his life and thousands of others, he must expose the plot and overcome his past, ultimately saving the lives of some he considers the scourges on the nation's urban communities. So I'd like to first read a passage from the first chapter. It's called Pittsburgh, and it deals with an incident that had a very traumatic effect on our protagonist, Cinque Solomon, who I talked about in the synopsis. In 1987, Eric B. was president, LL was bad, and crack cocaine had ascended its throne. Across the country, the black community was stagnant. Pittsburgh was no different. African Americans were last in education, employment, and income. The Reagan-Bush era had seen to that. Black men, frustrated and undereducated and vilified, roamed the streets for what remained of their manhood. Some were victims. Others became victimizers, slinging rocks, snatching gold chains, or killing for the new Air Jordans. All sleepwalkers, all slaves. Those lucky enough, however, to have jobs were seen as irrelevant to their employers as the slender plastic name tags or oval patches that branded them across their chests like cattle or slaves. Each morning they stuffed their belongings in old plastic drawstring bags, once boasting a new shirt from Fiffenwood Men's Shop or a pair of tennis shoes from Hannes Wagner, caught pat buses or jitneys only to be doomed to guard lobbies, clean toilets, or scrub pots, jobs that gnawed at a young black man's pride and manhood, leading him to do desperate things. Clunk. The bloody cast iron frying pan dropped hard on its side and then rested flush against the cold kitchen floor. Troy Watkins had gripped it so tightly and for so long, his hand had finally lost circulation. The pan's weighty mass was certainly never meant to be handled in such a way, and the effort had obviously taken its toll. Troy breathed heavily, coughing and choking on the thick air as spit dangled from his bottom lip. He wiped his face with his forearm and then glanced at the handle's imprint in his palm. For a moment, it was all a daze. Then he glanced at the destruction beneath. It all came back, but his conscience would entertain it no longer than anything else he had done. At 25, Troy's resume included drug sales, countless assaults, and 3 murders. His handsomeness was equally dangerous. Troy's face was dark as midnight. Flowing eyelashes that most women would have killed for draped deceptively over his deep, piercing brown eyes that could and did. With Troy's hair slicked back in a processed S-curl, he resembled more of a 50s doo-wop singer pulled from the Motown Revue, absent the polish and flashy wardrobe than a Run DMC-style b-boy his partners preferred. Perhaps to Thea Solomon's detriment, that's what attracted her. But had she known the life Troy led, she would have avoided him like the plague. And somehow, though, he managed to conceal how he got paid, telling her instead he did warehouse work in a strip district and occasionally sold bootleg cassette tapes. Troy's Jordan slid a little on the blood-soaked tile, but his left found its footing as he steadied himself against the oven. Shit, they were a mess. He lifted his foot and frantically scrubbed the potholder hard against his blood-stained rubber sole. A pinkish glaze covered his shoe. Troy shook his head and stomped his foot back into the bloody slick. $125 down the drain, he thought. Too bad he couldn't kill the bitch twice. He smirked and shook his head at the idea and body below. Fuck it. Troy stepped over her and made his way upstairs. Where first? Thea's bedroom. He stormed into the room. His eyes darted wildly around the room. A blazer, silk blouse, and skirt were laid out neatly on the bed. Troy moved toward the folding white metal closet doors and pulled them open. Shoe boxes lined the top shelf. He recklessly pulled them down and unceremoniously emptied their contents on the floor. High heels, old mail, receipts, nothing. He shoved his hands into the hanging blouses and dresses, searching and ripping them apart, one by one, as if what he was looking for could actually be concealed there. Nothing. Where is it? Troy turned around, desperately heading to the dresser. It was the last vestige of an old bedroom set which had belonged to her mother. Troy grabbed hold of the decorative metal handles and pulled hard, drawer after drawer hitting the floor. He knelt down and rummaged through them. Underwear, tops, shorts. Fuck! He grabbed an empty drawer and threw it against the wall, then abruptly jumped to his feet. Troy raked his palm and forearm across the top of the cluttered dresser. Perfume and knickknacks shattered against the wall and the floor. Thud! He slammed down his palms and dropped his head, his weight bracing against the dresser's top. Suddenly he realized something. His eyes slowly climbed to the top of the dresser's simple mirror, a high school graduation invitation tucked neatly in its corner. Troy took it between his fingers, slowly mouthed the text, and then paused. That! So, second passage. Sheba, once shapely and statuesque, sat hunched over on the bed's edge. Sweat covered her body and soaked through the frayed white polyester nightgown, outlining her now thinly chiseled frame. Her face drenched in desperation and anticipation. She was oblivious to Sinkay lurking in the shadows. Her eyes were transfixed. A crumpled baseball ticket, evidence of a planned but failed outing for him, laid next to Sin's gift on the nightstand. She unwrapped it, placed it in a tarnished spoon, and carefully warmed it over one of the candles. Once ready, Sheba plopped the small cotton wad in the cooker and used a syringe to drain out the dope. Her craving was becoming unbearable, so she hastily tied a small rubber hose from an old hot water bottle around her bicep. The scars on her arms explained her anxiousness. Needle marks covered her coal black skin like stars against a night sky. She repeatedly tapped the vein in the inside crease of her elbow until it resurrected itself under the scarred earth of her forearm. She eased the needle's tip into the hose. She eased the needle's tip into her vein, allowing her blood and the smack to mix in the syringe. She loosened the hose and then let the heroin flow into her. It moved quickly. Sheba exhaled as freeing some burden from a captivity. Her body grew limp and relaxed with the surge. The syringe dropped to the floor, raising her hand to her face. For the moment, it appeared she was her own lover. She gently caressed her face and neck. Then suddenly, she began to gag and jerk. Her body fell to the floor, knocking the candle directly onto her nightgown. The fire spread quickly and danced across her body, which tensed as she flipped and jerked uncontrollably amid the scorching flames. The smell of burning flesh consumed the room as white foam bubbled at her mouth and ran down her jaw. Her urine and loose feces wet her nightgown and the floor. Sin-K was in shock, frozen. Everything went into slow motion. He tried to cry out, but the sound was lost. His mouth was watering. His mouth grew watery, and he could feel his heart beating in his throat. A young Sin-K was terrified and helpless. "Mommy," Thea screamed as she burst into the room, almost knocking his rigid body over. She jumped to the floor, her hand frantically swatting at the flames from her mother's nightgown as he held her with the other. The tremors eased, but it was too late. Too late. She was gone. "No, no," she cried. "Mommy, no." Tears ran down her face as she cradled and rocked her in her arms. "Don't leave us, Mommy, don't leave." Sheba's burned skin peeled and flaked in Thea's hands as she stroked her limp body. Sin-K was still paralyzed and numb. He stared at his mother and Thea lying there. He would never be the same. Sin-K blamed himself. After all, he did not scream for help. He could not help her. Maybe if he had only came in sooner, loved her more, or behaved better, she would not have needed or wanted the smack, and she would still be alive. Thank you.
Man. Brother.
That was powerful.
So I know that was a lot.
Robert says, "Wow."
Yeah, I know it was a lot. So basically, to the main character, as I said, is an investigative reporter, Sin-K Solomon. These incidents in these flashbacks occurred in his childhood. His sister, his older sister, and they're out of order because the flashbacks are out of order deliberately. The first one I read was involving his sister, Thea, who was murdered by her boyfriend, who was a drug dealer, who thought she had stolen his drugs that he had hidden in their house without her knowing. Sin-K, the younger brother at the time, found the drugs and flushed them down the toilet. Never told his sister. He went off to his high school graduation. And so, I'm sorry. I got it. Yeah, he went off to his high school graduation. So he had flushed the drugs or whatnot. She had known. So her boyfriend came and looked for the drugs, couldn't find them, and beat his sister to death with a cast iron frying pan. So that's the first incident in his life that makes him despise drugs. Well, that's the second, actually. The first was the second reading where I discussed how his mother had OD'd in front of him on heroin. And so Sin-K, this character, despises drugs. He's been a straight shooter all his life. He becomes an investigative reporter. He comes across this story of this what appeared to be a street-level drug dealer that was found murdered, shot in a car with some drugs or whatnot in D.C. He lives in D.C. That was in Pittsburgh. And he writes it up as another typical drug deal gone wrong or whatnot. But what happens is the sister of the victim comes in and says, comes to the newspaper and says, "Look, my brother wasn't a drug dealer, blah, 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 blah," and leaves some kind of clue that he follows. And actually it helps to unravel her brother was not a drug dealer. And he was actually set up to look like one because he witnessed something. He witnessed this conspiracy and got it on videotape. And so this conspiracy is dealing with federal agencies or whatnot, this final solution to the war on drugs where black men are being abducted. Black men, street-level drug dealers in particular, are being abducted, and it's being disguised. During this period of time, because during the period of time that the story takes place, the black church burnings are taking place. So this is a huge federal conspiracy where the black church burnings were set to distract us and distract the media and the black community from these missing black men in these cities. And then because they were taking any black man. But in the urban cities, they were grabbing black men who were street-level drug dealers particularly. And so, nobody would miss street-level drug dealers because, of course, brothers have warrants, things of that nature. So if a brother's off the corner, nobody's found a missing person report. So Sin-K uncovers this conspiracy and, he's and part of this, he's struck with this dilemma. Do I really care to reveal this? They're doing America's doing us a favor. Drugs have destroyed my life, my family's life, so on and so forth. So there's all these pieces to that. At the same time, Sinclair also, he's an investigative reporter. A couple years earlier, he put this major, with his investigative reporting, he put this major drug dealer, Rashid Sims, in jail. And his girlfriend at the time was the state's attorney who basically put him in jail. The story exposed this drug dealer, but then the state's attorney put him in jail. And so he's got all these people after him in this story. So it's your typical man in peril. It's a cross between, I don't know, the Pelican Brief, from a mix of Donald Goines. It's a mix of, Grisham, the Pelican Brief. It's got the spook who sat by the door. So it's got all kinds of elements in this story. So it's an urban conspiracy thriller. So it's not necessarily a straight urban novel. I didn't write it as such. Those passages kind of reflect the urban novel feel, but the other passages I hit that you would read in the book would deal with this conspiracy thriller, Pelican Brief. We're talking about, we're talking about the National Security Agency. We're talking about spies. We're talking about this Operation Garvey that started in the 1960s that they put aside and decided not to use, and then they resurrected it to use it in the war on drugs. So that's the gist of the story. So I'm open for questions.
Okay, so, wow, that is a lot of moving parts. I was following you like every step of the way, like it was a movie. I was just like, okay, what's next? And what's next? And then the questions that I had in my head was like, what was he looking for? And then you explained that he was looking for his drugs. I didn't think he was on drugs. I didn't see that coming. But from your first Garvey Protocol book, we have a question from that one. We're going to start. It's going to bounce around because you had a few different passages. So the question for that one was, what was going on behind the mirror at the end of the first reading? She said she got a little bit lost. What was going on behind the mirror in the end?
Not a problem. I'm on. Okay, thank you. I was muted for a second. Well, no. See, he noticed her boyfriend, Troy Watkins. He noticed in the corner of the mirror the graduation invitation, and when he's going through and looking, he suddenly realizes and hits him that it might not have been her, and it was probably the brother. The brother might have done it. The brother might have done it, and so that's what it just clicks. Then he says, "That mother," and so it clicks. It clicks that, hey, I killed my girlfriend, but he's brutal anyway. He doesn't care. He beat her with a frying pan. A cast iron frying pan. And there's other scenes that actually flash back and give you the actual scene and the confrontation. I flash over it in the beginning. So that was what was happening in that scene. And you said there was questions on the other?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. We got a lot of questions. There's almost like a conversation going on too. So one of the questions that started off, she was, what did you mean when you said she was her own lover? And then there was somebody that kind of chimed in a little bit and said, I think when she hit the heroin, she kind of got in touch with herself. So we're all kind of speculating. We're going everywhere with this. So maybe
Sure. Well, and it was sure, certainly. And I used to be an investigative. I used to honestly be an investigative reporter. That's my background as a journalist, a police reporter, and an investigative reporter. I was a Washington News correspondent as well. So pieces of this are kind of taken from my own experience and that sort of thing, and stories I covered and that sort of thing. And so when some folks do heroin, when I was trying to create an image of when she shot up, it hit her, it aroused her, but she's just touching herself, and it's just like going through her body. And if you listen to some drug addicts, and again, I interviewed countless people for background, and when you talk to some drug addicts, when they talk about a hit of heroin or something, they say it's better than sex. You know, they'll say that that high or that feeling is better than sex. So I wanted to recreate that intensity. So she was also ODing. She was about to OD. It was just like, it had that kind of a powerful effect on her body. So that was what she was, her own lever. She was, she was like, laying, moving back and swaying. And then it just, seized, and she started seizing.
Okay. So what was your inspiration behind, there was a couple passages that you wrote. So of course they want to know what inspired you to write these different books.
Oh, great. Well, what inspired me to write the book? Well, again, the book deals in the overview, the conspiracy behind the book was, what made me write the book in general was, I read an article in, I guess it was 1996, and it was on the style section cover story on the Washington Post, and it said that slavery didn't end after the Civil War or something. And it was talking about black peonage, and the writer was talking about the story his grandfather told of how when he was in the South or whatnot, he was a little boy and he was walking along this road, and this white man tried to get him on the wagon or get him in his car, and he and his friend, and his friend got in the car, he ran away, he didn't see his friend. The writer was talking from the story of his grandfather. His grandfather didn't see his friend until like 40 some years later, okay? And he was on this, cart or whatnot, lugging with his family, this indigent family or whatnot with all this stuff. And he recognized them and he asked him what happened. And his friend told him he was kidnapped and taken and held on a peonage farm and forced labor. Now this is in this story, and this was, it just seems so fantastical, right? So the article also referenced all these cases of peonage, and the Justice Department files and files and files of records about black peonage. If you Google black peonage, Peonage, and it talks about black people were kidnapped into slavery after the Civil War, well after the Civil War, almost as late as 1960s. As the 1960s, you would be taken to the Appalachians, you would be taken deep south and the Appalachians and things of that nature, and you'd be forced to work in a coal mine at these peonage farms at gunpoint. Almost sort of like they tried to play up in the movie Antebellum. That kind of thing actually happened. People smuggled letters out to the NAACP or whatnot. People actually went to jail for holding people in a form of slavery. And these sheriffs, a lot of times in the South, when you thought black people were lynched, they were in jail, you got picked up, you got locked up, and you disappeared, and people thought you got lynched. No, the sheriffs would sell you off to these peonage farmers. And you'd be a slave for the rest of your life, possibly. And so I took that idea and said, well, if this could happen as late as 1965, what would stop it from happening as late as 1995? And then who would be the most susceptible to be taken and nobody would miss them? And that would be black street level drug dealers. Because the public, if the conspiracy got out, the public would be like, well, you did us a favor. You cleaned up our community. That sort of thing. Or, but this conspiracy went outside and beyond just taking street level drug dealers, because just like the true slave trade, it became about money. So they started taking any and all black men. And the character that initially starts this book off, who is the so-called drug dealer that is killed, that is not a drug dealer, it's a college student actually. His name is Al Blackman. And if the name is All Black Men. our black men. So that really, and Cinque Solomon Cinque, from the great liberator, the African prince that fought a slave revolt aboard the Amistad. So the names have a very symbolic power in this story, and it also connects to their characters as well. So that was the inspiration to the story, and also very true events to kind of explain the unexplainable about the black church burnings that just happened and then suddenly stopped miraculously.
So I looked it up real quick. Let me give the definition. It is called debt to slavery or debt to servitude as a system where an employer compels a worker to pay off a debt with work, and this is legally. So yeah, thank you for the history lesson. All the comments are saying that as well. Besides just the questions, people appreciate a little bit of the history lesson. Excited about the book. We have another question. I think we have time for one more, or we have time for a few more, I believe. Let me see here. What was the influence behind the main protagonist named Quanique, I believe?
Cinque. As I mentioned, named after Cinque, after the African who led the African prince that led the slave revolt on the Amistad. And most of us who don't know the history know the movie Amistad, would give us free, where Damon Hunsu rose to prominence. So that was that's the name, that's the character, that's his name, he's named. And so he actually in the story is trying to free the quote unquote slaves, because they enslave these black street level drug dealers and other black men that they take and they ship them off. They're being shipped out of the country in the story in shipping containers.
Gee, shit just got real, right?
Yeah.
Real fast, yeah. Let me see if I have any more questions for you before I go all the way. Also, real quick, while I'm looking for questions and comments, where can everybody find your books?
Certainly. The Garvey Protocol is available directly from Amazon.com. You can buy it from Amazon. You can also get my book, one of my poetry and books of poetry and essays called Love Letters, Death Threats, and Suicide Notes, New and Selected Poems and Essays. A second edition is available there as well on that. And that book deals with the lust, pain, and rage of black men as well. Soon, my website is being redeveloped and rehashed now, but that web address is wordsbyweb.com, and that is being revamped at this present time. But all the events, and so some of those links are dead there. So that's why I'm not really directing you there to buy the book. So go to Amazon. Also follow me on Instagram, primarily at Webb's Words, WEBBSWORDS.
Okay, so also, somebody made a comment regarding hearing about, so not savvy. Oh, look at me, just messing up the video. Do you believe that abduction from your story correlates, correlates with the organ harvesting taking place lately?
Well,
do you believe that these things go together?
Well, they could. The book opens with a set of facts. I have a consider the facts, and I list these facts to try to create a setup for people that may not be up on news to know what's happening. And so the organ harvesting could work weave into that story from the standpoint of what's happening to these black men as well. But these black men, the whole thing is black men are a commodity. That's also the underlying story, the government making black men a commodity. Also, the government criminalizing and vilifying black men. I also talk about how white supremacist groups are being used even by the government in this story. And I hearken back to what's going on now in the country because it talks about these white supremacist groups trying to start this Rahowa, this race holy war. And that's what we're seeing right now with these militias and these white supremacist groups. And people so much surprised about the involvement of law enforcement. And in the book, I talk about the old boy roundup, which really did happen in South Carolina. Google it in 95, 96, when they caught all those federal law enforcement agencies at this picnic party event festival in the woods in South Carolina with having a white supremacist picnic type of thing, and all these law enforcement agents were involved. It was caught on video by some militia groups to try to embarrass law enforcement. And so they've always been apart. And so the government uses white supremacists that we see in the book because they use them to actually start these black church burnings in the story. And so they could use to cover up the actual abduction, their plan to abduct. But by the same token, we have a government official using these white supremacist groups to obtain his goal of staying in office and reclaiming power. So it's this distraction, and people are being manipulated. And this is happening in the book. That's why I say it's inspired by true events, because I pull a lot of very true events and experiences into this book and incidences. I have to change some names here and there, but a lot of this stuff actually happened in the story. At least the framework of it did. And that's what makes the story so scary, but at the same time, it's also trying to make you think.
Okay, Eric, I really appreciate your time and a quick history lesson on pretty much what's been going on with this in society lately. At this moment, if there's nobody else that has any questions, I'm just going to go ahead and close it down and get our next guest going.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and I encourage everybody again to follow me on IG at Webb's Words, WEBBSWORDS, Webb's Words on IG. Please follow me and share that link. Thanks again.
What up, E?
Hey, Rob. What's up, boy?
What's going on, man?
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, we're here. We're